My name is Rachel. And I was born just minutes after my twin sister, Rosal. But those few minutes made a big difference in how our lives turned out. Our parents, Ellis and Lucas Macius, lived in a house in the suburbs of Pennsylvania. My mom was a real estate agent and always looked elegant with her perfect nails and designer suits. My dad had a small accounting business and spent his days working on spreadsheets and tax returns. At first glance, we seemed like a normal middle-class family, but there was something important that wasn't so normal. They clearly preferred Rosal. I noticed it for the first time when we were about 5 years old. At first, it wasn't so obvious, but over time, it became impossible to ignore. Other parents of twins dressed their children alike, making them feel special together. But not ours. Rosal always got the best. And I was left with what was left over. On shopping trips, Rosal got the newest Adidas sneakers while I was bought the cheap ones that were on sale. She had original Barbie dolls. And I only had the imitations from the dollar store. Even our birthday cakes weren't the same. Her slice always seemed bigger. And her pile of presents was higher than mine. These moments accumulated like small weights that I carried every day. Once, when Rosalie got her ears pierced at 6 years old, no one even asked me if I wanted to do it too. When Rosalie started taking ballet lessons, I was told we couldn't afford 2 classes. But somehow there was always money for Rosalie's hobbies: gymnastics, piano, art classes. Our family photos say it all. Rosalie is always in the center in an elegant dress from an expensive boutique. I'm in the background, dressed in something from the Target clearance rack. It was as if I didn't even belong in my own family photos. Maybe they just didn't notice. At night, I would lie in bed looking at the stars that shone in the darkness on the ceiling we shared. Rosalie's side always had twice as many stars. Even the sky above us seemed to choose her. But the hardest thing wasn't the toys or the clothes, it was how they looked at her compared to me. When Rosal spoke, Mom and Dad gave her their full attention. But when I spoke, their eyes would wander as if they were already thinking about something or someone else. Always Rosal. As we approached the start of school, I kept hoping that things would change. I thought that maybe once we were in class with teachers and other adults, our parents would finally see us as equals. Maybe they would realize that having twins was something special. Maybe they would finally see me. I remember our first morning of school. Rosalie and I were outside in our new matching uniforms, plaid skirts, white blouses, and navy blue cardigans. For the first time, we looked identical. I thought maybe this was the moment. The beginning of something new. The girl's mom smiled and shouted while holding the camera. But her eyes were fixed on Rosalie. Rose. Rose. Honey. Tilt your head a little to the right. Perfect. That familiar pain hit me again. Even with the same outfits, she still found a way to make Rosalie stand out. In the classroom, I felt a spark of hope. Our teacher, Mrs. Paul, seated us alphabetically, so Rosalie and I were next to each other. I thought that finally someone would treat us equally. But after school, the same old routine returned stronger than ever. Mom's silver van pulled up to the curb, and the pattern repeated itself as always. Rachel, go straight home and start your homework, she said without even looking at me as she got out of the car. Then she turned to Rosalie, her face lighting up as she spoke. Ready for ballet class. Honey, we have ballet on Tuesdays, piano on Wednesdays, art class on Thursdays, gymnastics on Fridays, and theater club on Saturdays. I watched them drive away, and then I went into our quiet house. The silence was my only company. I immersed myself in my studies, thinking that maybe if I got perfect grades, they would finally notice me. I would sit at the kitchen table for hours, solving math problems, practicing spelling, and reading ahead in my textbooks. The house remained silent until I heard the garage door opening. Then their voices filled the hallways. Rosalie, excited, talking about her latest achievements. And Mom, full of praise. Mom, I got an A on my history test, I would say, hoping she would hear me, but my words always seemed to fade into the air, unnoticed. One night, I held up my paper and showed it to her. Look what I got. That's nice. Dear. Mom replied without looking at me, busy helping Rosalie unpack her ballet bag. Rosalie, show Dad the new routine you learned today, she said enthusiastically. I kept trying. Perfect grades. glowing comments from teachers, gold stars. I collected them like treasures, hoping that one day they would make my parents as excited about me as they were about Rosalie. Then came the night that changed everything. I was 13 years old and in the kitchen, looking for a glass of water after finishing my homework. I heard their voices coming from the study, where they usually sat after Rosalie went to bed. I never paid much attention to their nightly conversations, but something made me stop and listen that time. Sometimes I wonder if we made a mistake. Dad said in a voice laden with something I couldn't identify. What do you mean? Mom asked. Having twins. Rosalie would have been enough. She's all we could ever want in a daughter. But two. What are you talking about? Mom replied. Rosalie is special. She's destined for big things. But Rachel. She's just there. We would have been fine with just Rosalie. The glass slipped from my hands, but I caught it before it hit the floor. I wish I could have caught my heart as easily. At that moment, everything became clear. Years of trying to win their love, hoping things would change, it all seemed pointless. They didn't want me. They never wanted me. I was the unwanted twin. The extra daughter. The one they wished they didn't have. After that night, something changed inside me. I stopped trying to win their approval and focused on my studies instead. Letting go of that constant need to please them, redirecting it, freed my mind from that weight and allowed me to advance in ways I never imagined. My grades, which were already good, became exceptional. Excellent analysis. Shell. Mr. Tony said one day in English class, holding up my essay on The Great Gatsby. This is exactly the kind of deep thought I was looking for. I felt Rosalie tense up beside me, her pencil tapping against her desk in that quick, sharp way she always did when she was upset. I kept my eyes on the teacher, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw that her face was turning red. This happened more and more in math, science, history. My teachers praised my work, and Rosalie couldn't hide her frustration. Things came to a head in chemistry class. Ms. Logan asked me to tutor other students. That night, I knew a storm was coming, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. From downstairs, I heard Rosalie's voice. Mom, the teachers are mean to me. They always praise Rachel and make me look bad. They do it on purpose. The next day, Mom stormed into the school, her designer bag swinging with every step, her expression saying that she was ready to cause a scandal. Her heels made a loud noise as they hit the floor. From the hallway, I saw her march directly into Adam Levine's office, where Mrs. Will, our teacher, was already waiting. I want to know why the teachers are discriminating against my daughter, my mom demanded. Mrs. Will calmly and professionally responded. Mrs. Macius, let me show you something. She placed our progress records side by side. Here are both girls' records. Rachel consistently scores in the highest percentile in all subjects. Are you saying my Rosalie isn't intelligent? Mom interrupted. Not at all. Mrs. Will replied. I am only pointing out that Rachel's academic achievements are. This is exactly what I am talking about. Mom interrupted angrily. All of you are biased against Rosalie. No amount of evidence could convince her. Later, when she got home, I heard her tell Dad that the teachers clearly had something against her precious Rosalie. When I turned 17, I was already tired of asking for money for my expenses, while Rosalie was given hundreds of dollars just for existing. So, I applied for a job at De Coffee Bean, a small cafe near our house. It wasn't a fancy place, but I loved the independence. Plus, my co-workers really appreciated me, something I rarely experienced in my life. Of course, Rosalie couldn't let me enjoy even that. Oh my God. Are you seriously going to be a waitress? Rosalie mocked one morning as I was putting on my uniform. That's so low class. Mom, can you believe Rachel is going to serve food to people? Mom just sighed and slid another 200 peso bill across the table to Rosalie for shopping. It was then that I remembered something I'd heard years ago, a heated phone call in which Mom was saying, I don't want anything more to do with you. You're an embarrassment with your little house and your cheap clothes. I have moved up in the world. She was talking to her parents. My grandparents, the same grandparents I'd never met because they didn't fit into her new lifestyle. That night, while Mom and Rosalie were out shopping again, I couldn't stop thinking about that conversation. I sneaked into Mom's office and found her old address book. under a section labeled Do Not Contact. I saw a name and an address in an old part of town. The next day, instead of going to my shift at the coffee shop, I took a bus to a small blue house with a well-kept garden. My heart was pounding as I walked up the driveway. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew I had to try. I raised my hand to knock on the door, but it opened before I could. An elderly couple stood there, looking at me with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. The woman had grey hair pulled back in a neat bun, and the man wore wire-rimmed glasses. "Hello. I'm Rachel Mathias," I said nervously. "I think you're my grandparents." Their jaws dropped at the same time, and the woman, my grandmother, put her hand to her mouth. "Oh my God. Oh, come in. Is it really her?" They invited me in, and before I knew it, I was sitting in their cozy living room, drinking tea from delicate cups. They couldn't stop staring at me. "You look just like your mother when she was your age," the grandmother said softly before changing the subject. That first visit turned into many more. I told my parents I was working extra shifts, but in reality, I was spending hours with my grandparents, bringing them pastries from the cafe. They were incredible listeners, genuinely interested in my life, my studies, and my dreams. For the first time, I felt like someone really saw me. Then came graduation day, as if everything always revolved around Rosalie. When they called my name as the valedictorian, my parents barely clapped. But when Rosalie crossed the stage, they cheered as if she'd won gold at the Olympics. The next morning, I wasn't prepared for what was coming. "Girls, we have exciting news," Mom said at breakfast, practically jumping for joy. "We're going to celebrate graduation in Miami." For a second, my heart lifted despite everything. I thought that maybe this time, they would include me. "Honey," Mom said, turning to me with fake sympathy, "we only have 3 tickets. For me, Dad, and Rosalie. You understand, right? Someone has to watch the house, and you have your job at the cafe." Rosalie didn't even hide her smile as she stirred her orange juice. "Don't worry, sis. I'll send you lots of photos of me living my best life on the beach." The next morning, I stood by the door and watched them load their expensive luggage into the taxi. Rosalie waved back at me with exaggerated emotion. "I'll make sure to send you beautiful photos of Miami," she shouted. "You can look at them between serving tables." The taxi disappeared around the corner, and something inside me changed. It was time for a change. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone. I called my grandparents, and the tears I had been holding back finally spilled over when I heard my grandmother's voice. "They went to Miami without me," I cried. "They just left me here like I was nothing." "Oh, honey," the grandmother said in her soft but firm voice. "Come over right now. We'll have our own graduation celebration." I drove to their house, still drying my tears. I turned onto their street and noticed something odd. A brand new, shiny Mercedes parked in the driveway, gleaming in the sun, completely out of place next to their modest home. "Whose car is that?" I asked as I walked up to the porch. The grandfather's eyes sparkled as he held up a set of keys. "It's yours. Happy graduation, Rachel." I stood there stunned. "What? But how?" "Sit down, dear," said the grandmother, patting the porch swing. "We have something to tell you." They explained how, after Mom had cut ties with them, they had invested their savings in some new tech startups. Those investments had done incredibly well, but they had chosen to continue living simply in their cozy home. "Your mother left us because she thought we were too poor for her," the grandfather said, shaking his head. "The funny thing is, we're probably richer than she is now. We just don't feel the need to show it off," the grandmother added. "We've been waiting for the right moment to help you, and this felt like the perfect time." I hugged them both tightly, overwhelmed by their love and kindness. They led me inside, where they had prepared a beautiful graduation lunch. The table was set with their best china plates, and a congratulatory banner for my graduation was hanging in the dining room, over homemade lasagna and garlic bread. They asked about my plans for college. I told them that I was very proud to have been accepted to Anton in East Windsor with a full scholarship. I start in the fall. Their faces lit up with pure joy, something so different from my parents' cold reaction when I told them. "That's wonderful," the grandmother exclaimed. "But what about housing?" "The scholarship covers it," I explained. I was planning on living in the dorms. Nonsense, the grandfather said firmly. We'll get you a nice apartment near campus. Somewhere safe and comfortable so you can focus on your studies. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was Rosalie, sending a photo of her lounging on Miami Beach. The caption read, "Wish you were here." I looked away from the message, then at my grandparents' warm smiles, and finally at the car keys that were next to my plate. For the first time in my life, I realized what true love felt like. I no longer felt like the lesser twin. 3 weeks slowly passed, and I kept busy with work at the cafe, visiting my grandparents, and preparing for college. Each night, my phone buzzed with new photos of Rosalie, posing on beaches, dining at fancy restaurants, or lounging by infinity pools. Her captions became increasingly nasty, living my best life while someone serves coffee. This is what success looks like. Some people vacation in Miami, others just dream about it. Finally, the day of their return came. I came and sat in the living room, pretending to read a book while keeping an eye on the window. When the taxi pulled into the driveway, I couldn't help but smile, knowing what was about to happen. It started with Mom. She stopped so abruptly that Rosalie walked right into her as she dropped her designer bag in the driveway. Dad was struggling with their overly expensive luggage and nearly tripped over them both. "What is that?" Mom's voice was sharp and shrill, cutting through the quiet afternoon. She pointed at the Mercedes in the driveway, her finger trembling slightly. It's Dad stuttered, his jaw practically touching the ground. "The newest model," Mom whispered, still frozen in place. I took my time walking to the front door, savoring their confusion with each step I took. Their tans seemed to fade as I finally stepped onto the porch. They all turned to look at me, as if I were a ghost. "Whose car is that?" Dad demanded, his face reflecting both the Miami sun and the shock. I casually twirled the keys around my finger, like Rosalie always did with her purse straps when she was showing off. "Rosalie," I said. She laughed, but I could hear the nervousness in her voice. "Yeah, right. Like you can afford that on your waitress salary. What did you do? Did you steal it? Did you rob the coffee shop? Or are you just parking it for some rich clients?" "Actually," I replied, taking my time with each word, like savoring a piece of expensive chocolate. "It was a graduation gift from Grandma and Grandpa." The color drained from Mom's face so quickly it was almost as if her tan had never been there. I thought Mom was going to faint. "What? You mean your parents?" I said. "The ones you were too embarrassed to talk about because they were too poor? Those grandparents." Dad turned to Mom so quickly I thought he'd get whiplash. "Alisa, call your parents right now." His tone was sharp, the same one he used when giving orders to waiters at restaurants. Mom's hand trembled as she pulled out her phone, her perfectly manicured nails catching the sunlight. She didn't bother to say hello when the grandmother answered. She put the phone on speakerphone without realizing it. "Where did you get the money for that car?" she demanded, her voice so loud it echoed in the yard. The grandmother's voice came through the speaker, calm and slightly amused. "Oh, hello to you too, dear. Did you enjoy your fancy vacation? I saw all the lovely photos Rosalie posted. The Royal Miami and the hotel look lovely this time of year." "Don't change the subject," Mom snapped. "How could you afford to buy Rachel a Mercedes?" The grandmother's voice sounded satisfied. "Well, dear, it seems like you underestimated those embarrassing parents you were so ashamed of. They were doing quite well. We're actually rich now." Mom's tone changed instantly, her voice became sweet and cloying. "Mom, I've been thinking that maybe it's time we put the past behind us. Family is so important after all." It was the grandmother who asked, her voice speaking of family. Mom's eyes went to Rosalie, who was already smiling. "You know, Mom," she said quickly, "you have another granddaughter who would love to get to know you better, too. She could use a nice car. Maybe even something more special." The grandfather's laugh crackled through the speaker. "You mean the granddaughter you just took to Miami while leaving Rachel alone?" Mom's face flushed. "That's not how I see it. As grandparents, you should treat the girls equally. After all, they are the same age. It's only fair that they receive the same gifts." The grandmother's voice turned sharp. "That's rich coming from you, Alisa. Parents should love their children equally, too. But that hasn't been the case in your house, Has it? The line went dead. Mom stared at her phone for a moment. Her expression shifted from surprise to anger. And she turned to me. Her face hard. Rachel. You need to give that car to your sister. Mom said. Excuse me? I replied. Standing my ground. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Rosalie needs a good car for college, Dad said. Interjecting. She got accepted to state. She needs reliable transportation. You're just working at that cafe, you don't need anything fancy. Rosalie was already walking towards the Mercedes. Hand outstretched. Give me the keys. Sis. You know I'll look better driving it anyway. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sheer audacity of it all was too much. This is my car, I said firmly. And I'm not giving it to anyone. Dad's face turned red as he stepped forward. If you don't give that car to your sister right now, you can leave this house. It's funny you should say that, I replied. Walking towards the Mercedes, I opened the trunk, revealing my suitcases and packed boxes. I had been ready to go for days. They stared with their mouths agape as I pulled an envelope from my bag. Oh, and by the way, I won't be serving coffee much longer. I got accepted to Anton in East Windsor with a full scholarship. Rosalie let out a scream so loud it could probably be heard 3 blocks away. Mom staggered backward as if she had been slapped. Dad just stood there, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. I got into my car, the leather seat creaking slightly because it was still so new. Through the windshield, I saw their stunned faces. Their perfect family fantasy crumbling. The last few weeks of summer at my grandparents' house were the happiest I had ever known. Every morning, I woke up to the smell of grandmother's coffee and the sound of grandfather humming while he read the newspaper. There was no tiptoeing around, no competing for attention, and no feeling like an unwanted shadow, just peace. Moving to Anton in East Windsor was bittersweet. I hugged my grandparents and said goodbye, promising to call them every day. Then I set off in my Mercedes with everything I owned. The drive to Alabama was like crossing a bridge between my old life and a new one. My grandparents had found me a lovely little apartment just 10 minutes from campus. It wasn't flashy, but it was much better than any dorm. Hardwood floors, big windows, and even a small balcony where I could study. My grandparents insisted on paying the rent, but no matter how much I protested, I still wanted some independence. So I got a part-time job at a local coffee shop. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was still serving coffee, but this time because I chose to, not because I had to. My co-workers were mostly other students, and for the first time in my life, I began to make real friends. One Monday afternoon, about a month after starting the semester, my grandmother called me with some surprising news. Your parents showed up at our door yesterday. My heart skipped a beat. What did they want? I asked. Oh, the usual, the grandmother said. Alisa was all smiles with fake apologies, asking about our finances and dropping hints about Rosalie's upcoming birthday. Your father kept looking around the house, probably trying to guess how much I was worth. What did you tell them? I asked, bracing myself. The grandfather's voice cut in on the line. We told them we already decided what to do with our money. It's all going to you. I can just imagine their faces and how they took it. I asked. Let's just say Alisa's smile didn't look so genuine after that, the grandmother said with a chuckle. We asked them not to come back. That night, I blocked their numbers and deleted them from all my social media, including Rosalie. I knew what would come next: sudden declarations of love, fake apologies, and promises to start over as a family. But no, I don't need their version of family anymore. Now, sitting in my law class, taking notes and actually enjoying the complexity of the material. Sometimes I think about that girl who used to pray for her parents' love. I wish I could tell her that she would find something so much better, not just love, but respect, support, and freedom to be herself. My phone buzzes silently in my pocket. It's probably my study group, confirming our meeting at the library later. Or maybe it's Liam, the cute guy from my psychology class who keeps asking me to grab a coffee. But not at my cafe. Thankfully, it's just such a normal life. Without drama. Without constant comparisons. Without feeling like I'm not enough. Just me, my studies, my friends, and a future filled with possibilities.